Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. This one I probably should have done sooner. This got very close to that 8 to 10 week waiting period I promised in my review policy, but I did get around to it. And that is Vices and Virtues by Beatrice De Seprontu. This is an adult contemporary about a woman working in a BDSM dungeon, not a sex dungeon, more like a light-hearted fantasy type thing. Softcore porn instead, if you will. Now, right out of the gate, I will let you know that if you're going into this for like the fun of the erotica-ness, you're not gonna get a lot of that. There are scenes and role-playing things, but like I said, it's not full-out sex scenes, and it's more clinical than anything. It's more for the sake of revealing things about characters or demonstrating things than actual titillation, let's call it. This is all about a woman named Cristela who she is Latinx, and her identity comes into play a lot. She finds some things out about her heritage, and I won't get too into it, but a big portion of the story revolves around her background, growing up with a mother who was on food stamps and was an unwed mother and was horrified about anyone finding out about that, and Cristela growing up with all these lies. She takes a job at this dungeon, and it's not really like a dungeon, it's more like a fun, not safe for work parlor that doesn't go into full brothel territory. And the book itself is told in a very non-linear style. The title, Vices and Virtues, is very apt. Every chapter is focused on either a vice or a virtue, and the non-linear storytelling comes into play in that the purpose is not to tell a story beginning to end, but to kind of like chop up all of these stories and all these flashbacks as they relate to the different vices and virtues. So this isn't really very linear. This isn't really very plot driven at all. This is much more character driven than anything else. They kind of alternate between the backstory of both Cristela and some of the other DOMs, DOMMES, in this dungeon, their backstories, why they're there, that kind of thing, as well as sessions with clients. And almost resoundedly, the clients always felt a little bit not pathetic, but not very far removed from that, in that most of them are usually described as being unattractive and not being able to get any kind of sexual attention anywhere else, or having strange desires, not to the point of anyone being in danger. You never get the feeling of like, oh, she doesn't actually want to be doing this. Like the women are very much in control of everything. The cast is very diverse. Like I mentioned, Cristela is Latinx. There's also multiple different people of color from pretty much all over. There's a fairly large cast. The employees at this dungeon kind of, you get some new members and you lose some. So it's not, for me, wasn't quite enough to really grow attached to almost anyone outside of Cristela. Like, it's basically her going through life with all these people flitting in and out. And it almost kind of read like reality. Like this was just a person talking about their life and how, you know, in different aspects of your life, people keep moving in and out. So I didn't really get much in the way of development in relationships too much. Of course, linear development is always going to be strange in a very non-linear format. And in general, it was more like something to just be interested in and intrigued by than being gripped for me. Like this is one of those stories where I enjoyed reading it as I was going, and there was always something to think about or imagine as I was doing it, but like I wasn't thinking about it all that often outside of the book. Like most of the time, all that I was thinking was, how am I going to say this in the review, rather than, you know, replaying scenes in my head or wondering what was going to come next. In the way of the plot there is, even though it was told in a non-linear story, there's not really a lot like in the modern day. You get a lot of backstories. You get pretty much every dom's backstory, but in the way of, quote unquote present day plot, there's not a lot. In fact, really it took to like the third act, if you could call it that, the final third of the book, to really feel like decisions were being made and characters were moving in a direction, and that kind of held me back from jumping entirely into it. The biggest issue I had with this book is, for some reason, has been a trend in the last couple books I've read, is again that kind of this is what's wrong with society or people these days type of mini sermons. And it was a little bit to be expected with the themes on vices and virtues. Virtually every paragraph, every chapter on a vice or a virtue would have how that vice or virtue relates exactly to that character's life or that session in the dungeon. And then there would also be this moment of people these days. Now, I feel like I've talked about this a lot in wrap-ups and other things before. And it's not that I'm against the people these days sermons. I can't think of another word for it. Philosophical homilies. That's just another word for sermon. My point is, when you try to talk so deeply about so many different aspects of society in one book, nothing really sticks. You really need to pick a couple at most, one at best, and really dive into that as a theme rather than trying to cover so many themes in one book. Because, yeah, I know she kind of said something about greed and kind of said something about envy, but like, it's one paragraph in a chapter every chapter, so after a while, I've forgotten the one from 3 chapters ago because now I'm focused on this one. And I would have liked maybe more to focus on the metaphor of the vice or the virtue, or the example of the vice and the virtue as they related to specific characters, and let that carry the theme rather than blatantly being like, people these days are this, people these days need to do this. It is very philosophical. It is very deep thinking. It is very focused, again, not on titillating, but on examining, on character study. So you really need to like that kind of book. You also do still need to be okay with some level of graphic descriptions. No actual sex scenes, but there are naked men and there are, certain not sexy times, but sexy times adjacent things that happen. So you still need to be okay with that kind of thing. The descriptions of one particularly strange male genitalia. So I feel like in that respect, this is probably one of those books where it's a very specific kind of reader that would like this, but if you like this, you will love it, if that makes sense. It's definitely a niche book, but if you're in that niche, it's definitely one you will want to read. I personally gave this book 3 stars. For, again, the reasons I mentioned. I wasn't really, thinking about it when I put it down. The themes of people these days type paragraphs kind of just went in and out of my head because there were so many of them. The characters beyond Christella were a little bit difficult to get into, but the writing style is fairly simple and easy to follow. The themes it does bring up, especially in the Dom's backstories, as varied as they are, was very interesting, and I appreciated that a lot. I would love to see something more with this concept, with more of a plot, something about focusing on a professional Dom in this kind of situation, but maybe more linear. Not that this being non-linear didn't help, it did. It's just the plot was there, even told in a non-linear style, wasn't as much there. But again, if this is your niche, if being sex positive and using sexual appetites as fodder for philosophical thought is your bent, you will love this one. I am still happy I read this, and I am still sad and guilty that, not guilty, guilt-ridden, that it took me so long to get to this. I'm really trying to get better at adding books to my Goodreads review a list as soon as I know that I have agreed to review them, so that I can keep track of what's the farthest back book that I agreed to. But this is a very well done one. It just didn't connect to me as much as I would have liked it to, but still definitely worth your time. And the good news about this is that for the first time in a review since I closed, I can say I am open again. Yes, I am open for review requests. I am going to be a little bit pickier moving forward for reasons that I discussed in another video. I really need to make sure that whatever books I say yes to are books that I am truly, genuinely intrigued by. Just make sure that I don't wear myself down with books that I'm only half-hearted about. But I have some new picks just in a couple days that I've been open that I'm really excited for. And I am jumping hardcore into reading review books for the month of October, so be on the lookout for several in rapid succession if I do what I'm planning to do, including some non-indie titles, because it's not always about the indie books, it's just 90% about the indie books. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.